echo all the thanks to everyone who has made it possible for me to come and visit here. I'm already loving it. I've been here less than 24 hours. I leave tomorrow, unfortunately. I have teaching commitments I have to honour. But yeah, it's absolutely wonderful here. And to bring all of these disciplines together in one session, to have social work, sport management, international studies, music, arts, culture, it's absolutely incredible. So I feel very blessed. And Kaylin and I met, at the orientation for Fulbright scholars. So there were American Fulbright scholars and Australian Fulbright scholars all got together in our nation's capital, Canberra, last year. And we just happened to sit next to each other. And straight away, we had a lot to talk about. And my school, so I have a continuing tenured position as a professor in health sciences and social work. That used to be called just social work and human services. So we were fairly new. And it brought exercise science together with, all these other sports science and physical science disciplines with social work. And that was an interesting lot of cultures to mesh together. And Kaylin, as a social worker who's using sport to fight for social justice and work with young people and deliver her therapeutic programs, she was like the poster child for our new school. So when I went back to Griffith University, I said, hey, I've met the most amazing Fulbright scholar. They got so excited that they said, can we have her for a seminar? We did the seminar. Can we have her for a whole day symposium on sport for social justice? So Kaylin, I'm just loving that we get to continue our friendship and our collaboration here and just to learn more from you as we go too. Because interestingly, that we often compare arts and sports and music and sports and what they can do and can't do. But it's been great to just even reflect on even this morning what happened in our songwriting from the Heart Workshop together. So thank you. And welcome to everyone here. Stephanie's already done an acknowledgement of country, and it is a really popular and commonplace practice in Australia to do an acknowledgement of country. If you're a visitor on that country, if you are a traditional custodian of that country, you would do a welcome to country. And so sometimes people sort of go, oh, it's a tokenistic thing. I don't feel comfortable with it. Why are we acknowledging sovereignty when sovereignty is not being acknowledged? So it's an interesting one, but from where I come from and the way we practice it, it is a cultural practice that comes from First Nations customs. So to travel across someone's land, we need to seek permission, we need to treat that land carefully, and we need to care for it as if we are the custodians while we're visiting. And so that's part of why acknowledging country is so popular in Australia, but it's a political statement, and it's a statement around healing our nation, which we very much need. So I like to acknowledge the land here as well, the Monacan people, and acknowledge their ongoing custodianship and care for this incredible country here. I was saying to Kaylin, one practice that I've been taught by my elders is when I visit a new country that I'm not, I don't live on or I'm not tied to, we put our hands under our arm and we take some sweat from our body and we put it into a waterway. So it could be a stream, it could be a river, it could be the ocean. And that's our way of introducing ourselves to that country, because country for many Indigenous people is sentient, right? And country wants to know, what are you doing here? Why are you here and what are your intentions? And so that can be something. And I just realized as I was hopping out of the car here and I've seen all your beautiful water. I haven't done that in Albuquerque because I haven't seen any water. But I did do it in California. So yeah, if you come to Australia and you get the chance, you don't need to make a big deal out of it, but yeah, just quietly you can do that. And whether or not you believe in the metaphysics or the spirituality of that, it doesn't really matter. It's a very humbling ethical practice to do, because we all got to care for country. And if we care for country, country cares for us. So acknowledging that, I acknowledge my own ancestors. So I've got a big range of European ancestry from my mum and dad's side. And I've also got Wiradjuri First Nations heritage from my dad's side. And so more and more as my career has developed, my family and I have been moving more and more to reconnecting with that, because we were given no choice but to be separated forcibly from that cultural heritage in Australia, like many other people in Australia, like many people here, and like many people in Canada. and all colonized countries. So that's the acknowledgement. And I'd also like to acknowledge all of you and all of your diverse cultural ancestries. And what an amazing experience that we get to bring all of that strength from all of those ancestors here today to engage in a learning exchange. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for from today. Like once I get talking on this project, I can talk for a long time. So, you know, give me a little bit of a nudge if you need to, but I'll try to wrap up the actual sharing what we've been doing part early enough that we can start to talk through some of this stuff. I'd really like to know how this project sits with you, if it resonates, if it's different, if, you know, what's happening here, and especially what might this kind of project mean for what we've been calling strength-based social work or culture-based social work or strength-based health promotion. So I am a musician, I'm a singer-songwriter, but I've worked and I've taught in social work and human services for well over a decade. And I've also worked with a lot of health promoters. So public health, social determinants of health. So this project kind of draws from all of those things together, as well as First Nations social justice. So we have a policy in the Remedy project. So we're in the third year of it. It's a 3-year Australian Research Council funded project. And I was really lucky to get all of my time bought out on a fellowship so I can spend all of my time on this project. But our policy is, which is supported by an elder who's on our project, Uncle Glenn Barry. He's a didgeridoo player, he's a visual artist, and he's doing his PhD with us on the project. No talk without music. That's our policy. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some music by an artist called Yuramal. Has anyone heard of Yuramal? Anyone know Yuramal? No. Yuramal's a Yolngu artist, so from the far north of Australia. And the Yolngu people are some of the most successful and prolific commercial musicians coming out of Australia from First Nations Australia at the moment. Incredible festivals. And yeah, they're doing incredible work fusing different musics together, languages and messages. But this, for me, it's about connecting music to country and language. And so much of what we found in the Remedy project is about those things. So connections between music, between language learning, between country and culture, and passing on all of those things for future well-being of families and communities and generations. So I'm going to pretty much play this in full. I thought about cutting it off, but the end is so good. I just don't want to limit that. So please, yeah, do whatever you feel is comfortable, like just listen, or you can move around, don't feel stuck. But I love this song. It brings in the energy of the water, which is a cooling energy and a healing energy. So whatever you want to make of that is very welcome. Here we go. This is Yuramal with Daliwui Bay. Feel free to move too. Like, we don't have to stay still. Thank you all so much for listening to that. And just to like put a little bow around that, I invite everyone just to take a few deep breaths, like maybe 3. Oh, he wants to go again. Okay. Thank you so much. So what I'd like to do today is tell you about the Remedy Project, who we are, what we've been doing. And I'd like to talk a bit about process, like research process that we've used and that has been really enjoyable, challenging, and really rewarding. And then to share with you some of our findings. And then open it up just to see what y'all think about, like, what does this mean? What can we do with this kind of thing? But here you can see photos of our deadly research team. And when I say deadly, it's a good thing. So yeah, deadly research team. We had 9 researchers in the university-based research team from across Australia. And you can see them all there. I won't go through everyone just for interests of time. And then we had an amazing team of community-based research leaders, so research associates. So we worked in 3 different locations, and we had different community research associates, all Aboriginal people, working with us, co-leading the project and making it culturally relevant, co-led, and validated in different places. Because I'm going to show you on a map in a while, there's so many different nations in Australia. Before any Europeans ever set foot there, it was already multicultural, like by degrees, okay? So we have to be that sensitive and work with different cultures, languages, people, politics, and country wherever we go. Part of the team, we've got 3 PhD candidates. And so that's Uncle Glenn, who loves doing selfies. He's in the front there. And he's the didgeridoo player painter I told you about. Christy's just behind Glenn. And Christy's an amazing musician, a queer woman who's a social worker and counsellor. And then Brigida's next to Christy with the red top on. And Brigida's an ethnomusicologist, and she's been working with First Nations women in Western Australia, and particularly looking at barriers to music participation and performance with women there. And then, you know, all these deadly academics there. We've got psychologists, we've got linguists, we've got creative industries professionals, we've got community musicians and conductors. It's a really interesting combination of disciplines just within that university-based team. And then we've got this most amazing international advisory group. And the research team I just showed you is First Nations majority people. And I have to say, like, I've been at this game for 20 years or so, and I've never been a part of a team that's First Nations majority. And often there's only one First Nations person on the team, and you're in that box, right? You're constantly having to have those hard conversations and try to raise things and do things differently. But in this one, we didn't get held up by all that, but it was still challenging in different ways. It's still collaboration, but yeah, and our whole international advisory group of First Nations people. So from Aotearoa, New Zealand, Vanuatu, and Australia. And we're so lucky to have a senior person on our advisory group is Uncle Bunna Laurie. And he's the front guy and lead singer and songwriter for an Aboriginal band in Australia called Coloured Stone. And they're legendary. You know, it was radical for them to be singing, you know, songs like Black Boy with lyrics, Black boy, the colour of your skin is your pride and joy. For Australia, that was revolutionary, right? So this band has paved the way alongside other musicians and elders for so many First Nations musicians to come forward. And their claim to fame is they knocked Michael Jackson off the top of the pops in Fiji with Black Boy when it was released. So really interesting. And to have Uncle Bunna in there and others there guiding us is great. And people like Sandy O'Sullivan. Sandy's a queer Wiradjuri scholar who's done so much work here actually with how First Nations people are represented in museums. So yeah, and Teodi Rakana from Auckland is an opera singer, Western trained opera singer. And Sandy Sir, I don't know, have you all ever seen the Water Music Ladies from Vanuatu? Has anyone ever seen that? So it's a women's music form and it came down from the Solomon Islands into Vanuatu, but the women play the ocean. So if you ever get to watch it online, they've got some great material, but it's unbelievable. So Sandy's mum is the matriarch of the Lewiton village water music ladies, and they do some incredible work around climate change activism through music and cultural sustainability in Vanuatu. So we're so lucky. And here's our community research leaders. So I mentioned in each place we work with different people. Rebecca O'Meara is, I don't have a photo of Beck, but she's a radio broadcaster and youth worker in Western Australia. Uncle Kev Starkey is an amazing blues musician and music producer and elder, and also Central Australia. So we were so fortunate to have an incredible team of community-based researchers through an organisation called Children's Ground. I'm going to come back to that and talk a bit more about Children's Ground. So in terms of what next, I want to sort of share 3 perspectives on the Remedy project. And Uncle Glenn has encouraged us to think about these perspectives using his community's cultural resources. And so he's a Gamilaroi man, and I was born on Gamilaroi country. So I'm going to speak from the eagle perspective and the lizard perspective and the emu perspective. And you might be able to guess what the eagle perspective is going to be, right? It's the up high, the overview. The lizard perspective, and Uncle Glenn often uses these perspectives in his painting. It's incredible. So lizard perspectives, the lizard's down low, right? The lizard's looking at things in fine detail and on the ground. And then the emu's kind of halfway between. The emu's a bird that doesn't fly, but has the long neck. So it's grounded, but also looks and can have the 360-degree view. So I'm going to try and give you a little bit of each of those perspectives in the presentation today. And it's an example of, we can use those perspectives in data analysis, in research design, in the way we run our teamwork. Like, it's so helpful, and it brings us a lot of resource for Indigenous research. So here we go. Bit of an overview. So in Australia, it's this model of social and emotional wellbeing has become kind of the most dominant one, the most popular one to talk about First Nations health and wellbeing. And when we say social and emotional wellbeing, we use that to cover a holistic sense of health and wellbeing. So we acknowledge that everything's tied up. Like, we can focus on the physical if we want, or mental health, but in reality, our First Nations models of understanding and promoting health and wellbeing are going to have across all of those. And we're located in country, we're located in communities and families. So that's a really popular model there. So we grounded our project, we anchored our project in that. And then we wanted to ask, what does First Nations music do to promote health across those domains or contexts? But also what we want to do is come up with maybe a new pathway, a new model, new theory to understand how First Nations music is functioning already as a cultural determinant of health or a strength. Because we've we spent so much time in the literature and in international policies on determinants of health. And music sometimes gets a little mention, sometimes cultural practices or painting, but it never gets fully opened up or amplified. And that was the gap we're kind of trying to help fill. These 2 are by Dr. Ray Cooper, who's a Wurrumai designer. She's a graphic designer, and she's one of the chief investigators on our team. And it's an example of how we've done inter-arts, interdisciplinary collaboration. And having Uncle Glenn, who's a painter, and Ray on the team, I'm trained as a social science health researcher and a musician, but having them has been an absolute game changer in terms of just seeing things in new ways, being able to share things in new ways, and having all of our outputs try as best we can to be culturally safe, evocative, welcoming for diverse First Nations participants and collaborators. So these are 2 that Ray has designed. This one is Ray's summary of our big project literature review. So that's Ray's take on, we had this massive black and white document. Said, Ray, can you do something with this? And so this is one of the resources that Ray came back with. But you'll see a lot of this is in this already. So it's kind of not new. It's maybe just a new way of sharing it. This one is one that Ray and I crafted together, and I did a literature review on First Nations knowledges that are written down, because of course not all First Nations knowledges are meant to be written down or even shared. But the ones that have been shared, I did a literature review on them just to say, what do we mean? What is healing? What does it entail? Like, where does it go? And so we came up with this as a way of summarising that literature. And now, after we've collected all our yarning data from across Australia, we're using this to help us like sort of categorise and code our data to really ask the question, what is First Nations music doing for our healing? And in particular, when we say healing, we're often talking about healing intergenerational and historical trauma in Australia. But it's not limited to that. The more and more I go around, the more I hear the word healing. And like some colleagues in Ireland are going, we can't say that word because it's seen to be too woo-woo. Yeah, so, but it's such a, our project proposal originally said health and wellbeing, and we rapidly realised we had to add healing onto the end of that as well. So it's so important. Okay, so they're kind of the guiding conceptual frameworks for our study. And then, yeah, our data co-creating. So if you were going to put a label on our research approach, it's probably Indigenous mixed methods, if you like to have a label, like to position things. And we did 3 community case studies. And the first 2 of those were geographically based. So one was, so this is an Indigenous map of Australian language, Indigenous languages, by the way, if you haven't seen that before. So one case study was that like sort of turquoise blue triangle shape right in the middle of Australia. And that's Aranda country. And that's desert country or fire stick country. And that's the one I worked on. So Griffith University really worked closely with Children's Ground. I'm going to talk more about that. The other one was on like this far side, sort of northwest Australia in the Kimberley. And that was Brigida's work and Edith Cowan University. And then the third community case study wasn't based on geography. It was more a network community case study around Uncle Kev Starkey's First Nations music networks. And it ran all the way down the East Coast. So, and that one, whereas the other 2 worked with, non-musicians, so, and maybe developing or non-professional musicians, the one down the East Coast worked only with professional First Nations musicians. So that's the kind of spread and diversity. And we used a process of yarning. So who knows what to have a yarn is? Yeah. So just have a casual conversation. It's a really common practice in Australian Indigenous communities to have a good yarn, I said to someone once, what's the best way of developing a relationship with people here? And he said, sit down, have a cup of coffee, have a yarn, have a joke. There's various stages of relationship development, and then it can turn into, for example, an in-depth interview. And people have written some amazing stuff about it, yarning as a research methodology. If you want to know more, just let me know. But that's what we used. And we also did an audience survey in Central Australia at 2 separate community arts festivals. And we did that because like for a very long time, at least the last 15 years, I've had all of these musicians from all different backgrounds saying to me, when I play music, I think I change the world. I think I've worked with refugees and asylum seekers in Australia and elsewhere, like I think even if someone comes in with prejudice against me, when they come to my music performance, they change their mind. And I can do that. And so for a very long time, I've wanted to go to the audience and say, did that happen? And so that's kind of what we were doing with our audience survey. So we couldn't find an existing tool, so we constructed one out of our literature review, trying to track what happens to audiences when they're watching First Nations musicians around all the known determinants of health for Australian First Nations people. So it could be, does it shift things around racism? Does it shift things around people's feeling that they can heal from the wounds of the past? And that's Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in Australia. So it's really interesting. I've got some of the findings from that to share with you. All right, and another underpinning Eagle view is we pursued a really strong formulation of what in Australia we're calling research sovereignty now. So we've had a big movement in Australia and New Zealand around data sovereignty. So there's so much data about First Nations people in Australia because normally we get talked about in terms of everything that's wrong with us, particularly in the area of health. Like we're just so overrepresented in everything that's bad. We are the most incarcerated population in Australia. We are the most over-researched. Our chronic health stats are through the roof. We experience a lot of domestic and family violence, neglect, poverty, and that's all around that intergenerational transmission of trauma and also internalising everything that's said about us in terms of those racist messages. So internalising the oppression. So it leads to a cumulative storm of these negative health and wellbeing outcomes. So there's a big movement in Australia that like we get prodded and poked and all of these things get recorded about us in government departments, but we can't ever get access to that data for our own decision making and our own, self-led, community-driven responses. So data sovereignty is about opening up big data, disaggregating it so we can actually know who's being talked about where, and then making it available for community organisations for their own decision-making and service design. And embedded in data sovereignty is kind of this thing where, and all those good things we know about decolonising research, like the people being studied should be actually co-leading every step and having ultimate decisions around what gets shared publicly. So we've got some fantastic ethics guidelines for research in Australia that say all this stuff, but it's actually been really hard to do it properly. But yeah, research sovereignty is just an expansion that basically says what we already know, and like people like Linda Tuiwai-Smith from Aotearoa, New Zealand, who's been writing for decades, and many other Indigenous leaders, First Nations people need to be doing research for First Nations people. And if there are other non-Indigenous people involved, they need to be working directly with and under the leadership of and control of First Nations people. So there's a lot to be said about a lot of that, but also even what counts as knowledge, how we work with it. So maybe we can have another week on that topic. But you remember that diagram on healing? So, we kind of got to a point where very early in our project, we noticed we were all starting to practice music again more. So we've got a lot of musicians or music lovers in our team. And Darren Garvey, who's a Torres Strait Islander psychologist in our team, he said, I rejoined the choir because I thought, how can I be in this project and not practice what I preach? And then, some of our community research associates were going, I bought the best new headphones and they just sound grand and I'm just listening to music all the time again. And we all started remembering what it was like to have music in our life on a daily basis. And me too. Like I started writing songs, I started learning the drums again, and we kind of all held each other to account. But I remember one meeting we had online and I said, hey, do you think, like we're all talking about everyone in the communities we're working with as if they're the ones who need the healing and the well-being. Do we need it too? And we all went, yes, we need it too. And so we kind of said, well, can we come out of this project feeling like we've had a healing experience ourselves? And so we started thinking consciously about how all elements of that healing model could be mapped onto our research processes. So I put those together there in that table, and I won't go through them all, but it kind of brings well-being into the bones of the research, right? It's not about well-being, it is well-being. We're trying to have a way of being, doing and seeing in the research that conjures well-being and healing. And it also allows for Indigenous ways of knowing, doing and being to enter the everyday practice of the research. So things like ceremony, before, during and after, like taking the time to slow down and really prepare and care for the processes or the yarns we're about to do, you know, and it's almost, it feels like a cleansing process. I've done so many yarns in Central Australia and there's so much process and ceremony. And like, if you've engaged in any kind of ceremony, like a wedding, and like we've all got diverse cultural heritages here, but you know how much effort goes into that ceremony of a wedding? You know, there's the preparation and then there's the event itself, and then there's all the post-event. And that's what Indigenous ceremony talks about as well. So we've kind of tried to adopt that ethic in, you know, in our yarns, for example. Like there's the preparation and everything has to be done with care and integrity. And then there's the event itself that needs to be done with care and integrity. And then there's the post. And it's the follow-up, for example, making sure everyone's got a copy of their yarn transcript, making sure they have full agency and control over what goes forward. And I know all of this is kind of become commonplace in a lot of research, but for us, it's got a new colour to it. Things like trauma sensitivity and training. So down halfway through, remembering and mourning. And this is such a big thing in Australian healing approaches, is around finding our stories, because a lot of us have been disconnected. We don't know why we are how we are, but finding our stories and finding ways to tell our stories and finding ways to have people listen to those stories with care. So yeah, I think all the team has been able to do the trauma sensitivity training now, maybe apart from one. Truth telling, acknowledging that we've probably all been oppressed and we probably all have oppressed. The oppressors and the oppressed are within us all. So, you know, like social work theory is very handy for this, but also the pointy end of this model, right, is very political and transformative. So while we talk about our research approaches, research as healing, embedded within that is a transformative impulse, right? We need change, and healing is not all about the interpersonal or the personal. It's deeply political, right? And we're talking in Australia and elsewhere, we need big changes to actually make all the effort that First Nations communities and families are going to heal themselves sustainable. We need the systems to shift so we don't have to keep repairing the same wounds over and over again. So the pointy end there is like down here, finding spaces in the universities where we can do our thing. Like, and we use the metaphor, you know, just clear the dance floor for us and we'll dance. Like, we know what to do, but it's been so important to have institutional allies to keep holding back the water for us. And we do have that, and we have had that. So it's been glorious. And, you know, it can go. You can lose a director and it's gone like that. So all of you who have positions of power, please hold back the water. It's awesome when you do. You make so much possible. Okay, and the other part of healing as research and all the interdisciplinary and inter-arts resources we have in our team is being able to draw in creative practices and cultural practices into the day-to-day. Like, you know, always provide food when you're having a yarn. That was one that I couldn't get organised on a lot of the time, but the community research associates would always say, slow down, come on now, we need to get some sandwiches, we need to go buy a coffee for everyone. Hospitality, you know, by another name. Playing music together, jamming, performing, having a laugh, sitting down, all different things. And I think apart from maybe theatre and drama, we found a way, or just naturally occurring, all of these Indigenous cultural healing practices to find their way into our research practices, either as part of data co-creation processes or as part of our interpreting and sharing the research findings and outcomes. So that has been really interesting too. And a lot of this is like, we kind of just did it and did the best we could with all of everyone's input, and then looked back and went, wow, you know how Auntie Judy said, these are all the Indigenous healing things? Actually, we did most of those. So that's kind of been a cool thing too. And, you know, it's great to be paid a salary to sing songs and you know, you try to make it as a musician, it's pretty hard to make a living. And we also have had some really hard times. Like we went to an island.
Sorry, I can't help you with notes on Apple.
Siri's trying to help me, but it's okay, Siri. We went to an island in Australia as a potential place for a case study. And it's an incredibly interesting place. And it was a prisoner island where there were no one had actually done anything wrong, right? So people were forcibly moved to that island from their ancestral homelands and kept basically as prisoners there. Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islanders, so it was mixed, so all different communities, all different cultures, all different languages, all put in one small place. And you know, I was talking about country and connection to country, so you take away that fundamental resource for well-being when you take Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people off their land. Yeah, and so people would have to apply to the colonial officials to go to the mainland, and it often just wasn't possible. Or to get married, you had to get approval, all these sort of things, right? So we went through all the university processes, did our got all our ethics approvals, and all the legal team came in and said, you've got to put in all these clauses into your approvals and get all this consent because it's music and there's probably going to be IP issues and you've got to forward protect everything. So it's kind of my first time leading a national project like this, and I kind of went, oh, okay, all right. And I went up there and we were doing consulting to see if people wanted to actually go ahead. And I had this black and white paper with all the typing in Times New Roman, with everything the university wanted me to insulate them against, like around. And everything we'd put in there. And like, I thought it was the most exhaustive ethics pack I'd ever done. I actually felt a little bit proud of it. And I got up there and we were having conversations with a senior elder and a really well-known musician. We put that piece of paper down and we went away and people read it overnight and it blew up. Because there was a clause in there, if we record your stuff as part of this project, we own the IP. And you say that to an Aboriginal person or a Torres Strait Islander or anyone in the world who's had their cultural acts, artifacts, knowledges stolen and appropriated, like it is rationally fuel for the fire. Like that is objectively reasonable to go, no way, like get out, no. So anyway, after a lot of debriefing around that, Ray, the designer, came in and I said, Ray, can you help us? Because this ethics pack, like it's got a lot of great content in there, but it's fuel to the fire. Like we can't keep using it. And she goes, all right, show me what you did. So I go in there and I give her the doc. She goes, oh, no. Right. But then we talked about what was traumatizing or re-traumatizing about that experience. And we tried to do the opposite. So Ray designed us this yarn through ethics pack. And I've got one copy of it here and I'm happy to pass it around. And it was beautiful. Like, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I will pass it around as an example. So it has all of that stuff around data sovereignty, all of that good stuff, IP, but you notice it's so different, the design. And because Ray focuses on decolonizing design, that's Ray's shtick. So it was just a blessing to have Ray come in and completely transform our ethics work. Okay. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. We're still in Eagle perspective. So we're still analysing the data. It's so rich and we're still trying things. We're doing a lot of trying things, new things. But one of the things we've done is, so Uncle Glenn painted the findings from one of our pilot analyses around intergenerational music making. And we've included this as part of our interpretation resources in an article that's just been accepted for family and community health. So that's an example. Indigenous ways of working, Indigenous knowledges coming forward. So I have to say, I like looking at that better than a 5,000 word journal article, but it's in the journal article. So we're kind of trying to do both end a lot of the time. And this is Uncle Glenn's take on the project literature. And so we presented this at the Aotearoa Institute Health and Wellbeing Conference last year. And you see that's the biggest word there down the middle. Agency. Yeah. So it's kind of mixing what everyone's been saying to us through our yarns and our surveys, and with Glenn's own agency as a senior Aboriginal man. Here's Ray's take. We brought all the community research associates together in Meanjin, Brisbane last year, and we yarned for 2 days straight. And everyone from the case study said, this is what we found. And we started trying to build that meta story, the meta narrative. And Ray just sat quietly drawing. And this is Ray's take. It's like, this is theory, right? To me, this is theorizing. So she listened to what we were all saying. And then she said, I think this is what people are saying. Music's at the heart. There's old song lines here on this leg and the new song lines. And for us, song lines are like songs actually. They guide you through country. They tell you where you need to go and what you need to watch out for. So it's kind of become a metaphor. So First Nations music practices now, people are telling us that it's making the old new again and revitalizing culture, but also giving us new pathways for the future. So it's inherently creative. So that's an example. And then we've also been writing songs. So I'm not going to play this whole one, but I'm just going to get you to feel into the vibe of this one. So this is one co-written by myself and Phil Graham. He's my hubby. He's in the project as well, because a lot of this started with us doing community music work together. And it's written from a lot of different conversations, and Ray did a film clip for us. I'm not going to play it all, but just a little taste. Okay, so that's one example. Right, does anyone need a little stretch? Please do whatever you need. Okay, so I'm going to scoot through some of the findings stuff now. So yeah, lizard perspective, down on the ground, close inspection, detail work. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the Central Australia work. And we got referred to partner with this amazing organisation called Children's Ground. And it's a community-run organisation. I'm actually not going to play that one. It's a community-run organisation started by Aranda elders, and their agenda is to try and address severe poverty in their communities and families over a 25-year period, so an intergenerational approach. And their main mechanism for doing that is culture. So teaching and equipping local people, particularly from bubs, like prenatal and postnatal, all the way through to the elders, teaching Aranda culture and Aranda lifeways. So we were really lucky. Amanda Gorey, who's an Aranda researcher on our project, said, like, we did an EOI process. So when I say we, I mean Griffith University researchers. With Children's Ground, they've got an incredible research framework. If you want to look up their website, like you want to see decolonising research in action and research sovereignty, check out their research framework. It is impressive. And Amanda said, us doing an EOI or anyone's like going through a ring of fire. But I loved every second of it because I could feel the exercise of their agency, those local traditional custodians. So we've been really lucky, and they sort of treated us as their guinea pig for even ramping up their processes more. And yeah, we all learned a lot. So we yarned with Children's Ground, First Nations staff and governance members about the role of music in their lives. Other local Aranda people outside of Children's Ground, First Nations musicians. So this is in Mbantua, or in colonial terms, this town's called Alice Springs, if you've ever heard of it or been there. They were running a music program, and we didn't have money to do any music programs, so we wanted to partner with people who already had something going, and they did. And we also yarned with non-Indigenous staff members and visiting facilitators and people in surrounding organisations like Music NT. And yeah, and so we then went and we've done an inductive coding of that yarn data. We've coded each case study separately first, and we've tried to use the words and language and concepts of the people rather than trying, like, we can't not know what we know when we're coding data, but we've tried to privilege local people's words and concepts. So these are the highest coded themes when answering the question, how does First Nations music in Aranda communities and families work as a cultural determinant of health? And you see there that strengths around and links between music and family, like strengthening families or intergenerational connections, and kinship. So kinship is like acknowledging that even if we're not biologically related, we might be related in other ways. They came up really big. Self-determination, being promoted through First Nations music practices and listening, intergenerational nature of those practices, connections to country. And when I say country, sorry, I should have explained this. You might have been thinking I was talking about country music. Country for us is the term we use for the living natural environment. So country is all of our mother. So when I say country and people in Australia, that's what we mean. So deep connections to country through First Nations music and connecting with our feelings and emotions. And in this case study, it was huge. People are self-managing their well-being, their mental health, social emotional well-being through music listening a lot of the time. It's free, it's private, and people talked a lot about that. I'm not going to go to a counsellor and tell them all my stories. No. You know, I know what I need. I got my playlist, I got my songs, I put it on, I have a good cry. Boom, I'm ready. I go again. Back to work, back to being a mum. So that level of self-determination and self-management really came out as big. Aboriginal music in particular, and activism and human rights. So speaking truth outward. And sometimes when I talk to health promoters, I say, oh, I'm doing this project, and they go, oh, that's so great. We want to get health messages into the communities. I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing, or what you should know, is that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander musicians are sending messages to you through their music. And that's the dominant way that people talked about messaging, is outside, you know, truth-telling, advocacy. Music links to language learning and revitalisation was huge, and pride. So shame is such an incredible debilitating factor in all of our Indigenous communities. And to have music as a way of sort of counteracting that has been really big. So they were their highest coded themes for Central Australia. The lowest coded themes, which is also always interesting to look at, is music not for a purpose. So I'm affiliated with Queensland Conservatorium, so a conservatoire model of music, and I often get challenged on this when I talk about this project and other things, or music and health. I get the criticism in a really good way that you shouldn't be just instrumentalizing music. Like music is valuable for its own sake. Art is valuable for its own sake. And I go, it is. I agree. Or it's got proximal benefits for the people who are actually practicing it. But when you talk to First Nations people in Australia, music has so many purposes. Like music has jobs. Music is so culturally embedded as being functional. We teach our kids themes like I parent through the music. If I want to teach my teenage daughter an important message, I say, listen to that song, So, but this thing, that's why I'm explaining that, because music not for a purpose was very minimal, like as in most things that people talked about had a function, a social function, a cultural function. Music to not feel. So a lot of time people talked about putting music on so that they could feel the feelings. And in trauma healing, that's big. Like we want to find ways to safely feel the feelings. So, only a couple of people talked about using music to numb themselves. Karaoke, it's not big. A world with music is unimaginable. And getting ready to pass. And by that means getting ready to die. All right. I just want to read a couple of the actual words from the yarns, if that's okay. So this is one from a Aranda musician. His name's Keith, and he's identified by choice. And this is one of the many things that Keith said. The music of the culture is in the deepest tissues of our being. Oh, sorry, no, this is Auntie Judy Atkinson first. The music of the culture is in the deepest tissues of our being. And that music can be a group of men just putting their feet on the ground, making music with their feet, or it can be a group of women sitting and making music as they hit the sides of their body. And the music is there within us. And then Keith said, one of the brothers out here said to me a couple of years ago, and it really was a light bulb moment, he said that our grandfathers sang and danced all around here, and it's in the wind and it's in the trees. And that was really powerful. It was a really powerful way to explain it. And that just gave me peace as well, sort of thinking, yeah, that's right. It'll never go away. It's in the hills, the trees, the hills, the breeze. I'm just going to flick through. There's so many. And we also coded to country. So this was something, it's an approach recommended by some Indigenous researchers in Australia, but just seeing the links there. So an example of something that Edmund said, who works at Children's Ground, I can see a little change. Like it's pretty big, but it's just the start of something, a spark, just a spark, that little flame up, I guess. It's a spark in there. So yeah, it's a big thing for our people because sometimes our music speaks the truth in what we see and what we do in life, and it's important to keep our music. And then Nookie, who's one of the senior musicians at Children's Ground, said, it's like a book, white men book. You sing this song in one page. When that page is finished, you've got to flip over to another page and sing another song like that. But we leave our pages to the stars in the Milky Way. Music is growing like wildflowers growing in the desert. And that was Uncle Bunalori. And then Mitchell, who also works at Children's Ground, said, it lightens the mind for some of the people around here. And plus in the cultural way, it makes them feel strong. And even in white fella way, listening to all them songs, but especially in culture way, that's the main things, and to keep us going through generations to generations. And then it was Nookie who said, music cleans our spirit. All right. So I'm just going to finish on a little bit of emu perspective. So remember that emu's a bit in between the two, looking around 360 degrees. And this is where we did the audience survey because we wanted to know, well, what's going to change? What might change, what is changing in terms of those broader systemic determinants of health. So all the things, both determinants of health, if you're not familiar with that, I just mean anything in our lives and our surroundings that shapes our health and well-being. So it is pretty much anything, but there are some ones that really affect us more than others. So yeah, we went to 2 festivals and we did a pilot implementation of the survey. We had about 78 people respond, mostly women. And I learnt through this process that Alice Springs is the lesbian capital of Australia, said by Christy in our team. Yeah, so we were really fortunate to get a high number of LGBTIQA+ respondents in the survey, which was fantastic. Quite a good spread of ages filled in the survey for us. Really interestingly, it was mostly non-Indigenous people. But if you look at the survey, at the festival demographics, it kind of matches. Plus, we didn't have the community research associates with us. And I think that really affected the number of First Nations people who were willing to participate in the survey. So these are the findings in graphic form. So we used an agreement scale. So you strongly agree to strongly disagree. And the blue, green colours are strongly agree, and the like green, orange, red are neutral, disagree and strongly disagree. So I'm just going to let you go ahead and have a read. Are people able to read that? And just notice what you notice, if that's okay. And if you're a stats person, you'll notice that there's no statements put in the negative. And that was on purpose because we made a conscious choice not to expose any First Nations people to deficit statements about them or their music. We tried to put the most outlandish things in there that we could to get people disagreeing. But yeah, you'll see. The grey's neutral, but in those 2 questions where there's a big lot of grey, that was added late in the pilot. So a lot of people didn't answer it. Does anyone need more time? Yes, dark red strongly disagree. Ready? Sorry, I know I'm rushing you. I've taken up all the time and now I'm rushing you. But I do want you to see the next slide, which is the remainder of the statements, because there's some really interesting stuff there. So this is another lot of questions if you want to have just a skim through. And I'll just tell you that that statement at the top, First Nations music promotes First Nations self-determination and sovereignty, was the most highly agreed with statement in the survey. Isn't that fascinating? But again, these are mostly non-Indigenous people answering it. We need to know what First Nations people would say about that. But then the second one, participating in this event made me feel proud of my own culture. It was the least agreed with statement. And again, I remind you that it's mostly non-Indigenous people answering the survey. So I think there was some good trouble stirred up. Isn't that fascinating? Like, I'm a qualitative researcher, but I love this stuff, you know, like this is really fascinating. So I'm just going to leave that as a sticky note for you in your mind to think about. And there was Children's Ground, who I've talked about. They ran an event within one of the festivals where they had, they played their own songs they'd written, and they had all the kids, and it was in a park, and it was intergenerational event, no alcohol, They had a barbecue, free giveaways, the kids were running around. And it was the only event in our survey where there was no neutral or disagree to those positive statements there. Like, this kind of musical activity helps heal wounds from the past. It strengthens my connections with First Nations communities. It helps me know more about cultures, and it strengthens collaboration between First Nations and Indigenous people. So that was interesting too, about that intergenerational park, you know, all the things that Children's Ground does so well. So now, we are going pretty good on time. I think, you know, we're coming in like for a good landing here. So what I would love to do is, I know that's a lot. Like, I've talked for, I don't know, around an hour now and given you a whirlwind tour of First Nations Australia, country, the Remedy Project, all this stuff, research approaches. But I'd love us to think together now about what can you teach me, really, or what can we learn together? What are your takes on this around, maybe the role of music and the arts in our lives, in communities and societies? We might want to talk about strength-based social work and health and wellbeing promotion. Because, I mean, our perspective is, it has been confirmed through the Remedy Project that First Nations music activity and listening is a cultural strength. So it's a naturally occurring thing. And our big question is, how do we not muck around with that and wreck it, but just support it? And Amanda Gorey has gone, we've done conference presentations together, and there's a movement towards social prescribing of the arts in Australia. And she said literally, don't anyone come back to me and say, you need to be listening to music 2 hours a week or something, because I don't need you to come telling me that. I know that, but just if you support what we're doing, I'm fine with that, you know. So it's really interesting, that self-determination, sovereignty part of it. What might it mean for culture-based social work and health and wellbeing promotion? So really decolonising how we see our role as social workers and social work practice. Creative, self-determined and naturalistic healing from historical and intergenerational trauma. What might there be to say? And what are the limitations of all this? What are the things to watch out for and be aware of? So can I suggest, maybe to start, if you just turn to your neighbour, someone, maybe you don't know people here, maybe you do, but if you can find one person and pick any of those topics or other topics you've got in mind, and maybe just yarn for a couple of minutes each. Like, maybe share for 2 minutes each what your thoughts are at this point. That would be awesome.
Yeah, so more recently, Instead of health. Should be the word. It's weird.
Two more minutes? 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. You like it? Yeah.
I'm so
2 more
interested.
minutes?
No, we have a question.
Oh, okay. No, this is on, just in case. Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah, some communities and cultures believe that if a person passes away and you say their name or show their image, it stops. Well, this is one belief that I've been taught, that you stop their spirit from moving on, you hold them there. So you don't want to be speaking their name or showing their image in this plane to stop them from moving where they need to go. So that's one version that I've heard. Yeah, so it's a culture about what happens when we die. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And we've had 2 senior elders who participated in the project pass away in the last 18 months as well. So we hadn't released anything publicly, so there's no problem. But everything's on pause, and a lot of communities are just negotiating it on a case-by-case basis. And so you'll see they can nominate a family member for us to contact in the event that they do pass away. And the family will often decide together after a certain mourning period. And then they might say, no, go ahead, because they wanted their story shared and it's okay. Or they might say, no, we still don't want it out in public. But if it's already born, it's really often usually too hard to get it back. If it's outside of our direct control, there's nothing we can do. But it's also about that commitment to stay in contact with people. Yeah. So you have 1,000 people, it'll be hard. But I guess then, you've kind of got a lifelong commitment to try and let people know at least where you are. You might know where you might not know where they are, but at least they can find you if they need to tell you. Is that answer?
Yes. Yes, and this is definitely often. Do not speak their name, still talk about them, but more in a roundabout way.
Yeah, and for example, in our country, you wouldn't use the person's first name, but you might use their initial. And the family will tell you what's okay to call them by. Yeah. So, and a lot of people stay. Like say we had a senior elder, MK, who passed away. MK was already called MK out of respect to someone earlier who had passed, who had the same name. So yeah, that's like if your name's Naomi and someone Naomi passes away, I go by a different name. Yeah, in that community, it's not all communities, but. At Children's Ground, people are often called by their last name because no one, out of respect, no one's saying that Christian name, that first name. Yeah, but it's different place to place.
So they would use the last name that you don't know.
Yeah, and it's all part of it. And just, I guess, being as floppy as possible as a visiting researcher to just adapt to whatever's needed. But it's so great when people like Children's Ground tell you, do this, don't do that, do this, and give you feedback. And all right, thank you. Okay, just maybe one more minute, everyone. Awesome. You can improvise. One, two, three, four. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So what did you come up with? Would anyone like to share back? We can solve the world's problems in 5 minutes. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I was talking about the role of music and the arts in our lives, communities and society. I was talking about my experience. I'm coming from Lebanon, so it's only one semester I'm spending it here. And I was surprised, like I didn't feel homesick, although it's the first time I travel and stay away from my family. But I listen for too much music. Music, like I usually hear back home cultural music, and I find music a way for intercultural exchange. We had an event here, which is a global cafe. We had like informed others about our culture, and they would put some music at the end. So also like I'm listening to more American music. So it's a nice way to have some intercultural exchange.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And certainly a lot of the people in our study agree with you. Yeah, they're using, like having similar experiences. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Who else?
So, I'm part of an organization where we're taking a fresh look at our programming and how we deliver it in different ways. We can reach more folks. And coming to this, I realized I just like completely forgot about music. And it's wild because, you know, I was just sharing, like, I love music. I use music to help me cope with different things. It enhances my experiences in life. And I don't know how I divorced that from the work that we hope to accomplish in the community. Like, I use it for myself. Why wouldn't other people be interested in the same thing? Like, why did I put these things in silos? And coming to what you presented just helped me to realize I can expand my mind to incorporate more things than what we've traditionally done in our organizations.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and Children's Ground reflected things back to us in a similar way. Like, even though they already had a music program, people who didn't regard themselves as musicians were saying, after the yarn, music's so everyday for me that I actually didn't realize what I was even doing with it. So yeah, similar. And if awareness raising is the only outcome, then that's still an outcome. Yeah, cool. All right, I'd love to hear more about this organisation. Yeah. All right. Who else would like to contribute? Yeah.
So for me, the way I've been using life recently, for me, I'm Hispanic, and I've never been to the home country that my family has grown up, so I'm Salvador. And I've always grew up here, and I've always felt like not really connected with my culture besides just, being with my family, speaking Spanish here and there, kind of like broken Spanish. And I think like just listening to music from different countries, Latin America is huge, so it's like a bunch of different it's like the same language, but like they have different ways to say it. Whereas sometimes I don't even understand that, yeah. So it's just like a way that I feel like myself more connected, and even maybe like if it's like an old song that maybe my grandma listened to, it's like maybe I wasn't there in that moment, but it's like you can share, those memories, and you feel connected to them because you're sharing, music that maybe was from there, and maybe you didn't grow up there, but it's like you still feel connected in a way. I think that's like really important for me, and I feel just more in tune. It's just like being Hispanic, I guess.
Beautiful. Yeah, cultural identity. Yeah. And that is in those models that I said were really popular in Australia, cultural identity and being able to connect with it in exact the same way, like that you're talking about. Oh, not exact because you're from a different place, but yeah, comparable. Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm also Hispanic, but I also find that music is a way of like, just not only like sharing with different cultures, like for me, I listen to lots of music that I have a lot of air effects and then probably a lot of like air music. Yeah, it's so like it just sounds so beautiful. And like, yes, I don't understand the language and like I'll be listening to it and it's like it's more of the feeling it projects into me and like the feeling of like I don't know, it's just like either it's like for love or light, or sometimes it's just a feeling of like being able to connect with someone else in their culture is, I don't know, I guess it's rewarding in a sense, but also just like, I feel like without them having to tell me, or this is where I'm from, or this is what we do, it's just another way that we connect with them.
Yeah, connection and unity. Yeah, powerful stuff. Yeah. And I haven't listened to enough Arab music, but yeah, I'm listening to Spanish because I'm learning Spanish in Albuquerque. Yeah, awesome. And what you said is reminding me of something that this Vanuatu musical director from Espiritu Santo said, that they actually used music to counter like violent conflict between villages. And they started the Bamboo Band, like as a social enterprise. It's intergenerational, playing the big hollowed out bits of bamboo. And yeah, he said the violence went down, and that intercultural like group and connection and unity was the word he used, went up. Yeah, really important, and like relatively cheap, naturalistic. Yeah, what a resource. And it's not always great, by the way. Like there's a lot of bad things that we can do with music too. And we always asked everyone what negative things have come out of music activity for you. And we did get a few examples, but they were way down compared to the protective or positive. All right, let me check the time. Okay, we're right on time. Has anyone got a burning contribution that we must hear today? No. All right, okay, I'm just going to finish with, if you want to find me, you can always ask Steph or Nicole or Kaylin. Or if you want to check out our website, we've released a lot of our work there. We always try to have a community output that's outside of a paywall. And we try to have plain English community outputs as well as scholarly outputs. So if you want to check it out, if you want to hear more awesome Australian First Nations music, you will find a lot of links on our page, because we've got this national broadcaster called the ABC, and they invited me to do a new music segment. So when I'm at home, every 2 weeks, I get to go on the radio and like spruik 2 First Nations musicians. So there's links to those shows and you can find new music, like awesome. Or I'll send you a playlist or anything, just let me know. And can I just thank again Stephanie and Nicole and Kaylin for organising today. And thank you all for coming and engaging with this work, and just reach out to me if you've got suggestions, questions, critiques. We need it all. All right.
Just really quick, if we can thank Professor Sunderland again, and we also have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you all for coming. Yeah. And please join us for the reception outside with Dr. Sunderland. And I also wanted to put a quick plug in for Fulbright. So if you're not aware of Fulbright, it is a fantastic opportunity to go abroad. So it's something that both faculty and students alike can participate in. And so if you are interested in a funded experience abroad, I highly encourage you to talk to either the staff in the Global Education Office, but really the program is owned through the National Scholarship Office on campus. They are the ones who support students who are interested in applying. They're housed in the Honors College, but you don't have to be an honors student to access their resources and their support. They're incredibly supportive and helpful to making sure that if you're interested in applying, that you have the best chance possible if you go through their process. So especially to those of you who are students, I highly encourage you to consider looking into Fulbright. And then for those of you who are faculty work here as well, that we actually have a few Fulbrighters in the room. Raise your hand if you have been a Fulbrighter. So yeah, we've got a couple of Fulbrighters here with us today. So perhaps if you have questions about it, you can ask us. Those of us who raised their hands. I'm not a Fulbrighter, but I know a lot about Fulbright, and I'm happy to answer questions. So,
yeah. Yep, 100%. It's a wonderful program. Like I actually was so scared to apply. I cried when I wrote my application. I thought people like me don't get to do this. And I would never thought I would apply. And I've heard that from other First Nations applicants sitting on panels, but do it. It's amazing.
You can also apply as an alum if you're within a certain number of years out. So any seniors in here, don't count yourself out. You can still apply through VCU when you finish.
Yeah, it's awesome. Okay, we'll go and have a nibble. Yep, thank you.